political capital has become like the dissad as far as, I mean, maybe I'm wrong about this, but like, I'll tell you what, like political capital was like the only link that I heard. To the point where people almost didn't even like use it by name. It was just kind of like, oh God, you do something and that affects Obama's ability to push something, and like the thing that he's pushing is good. You know what I mean? But even like Paul Light, and I don't know if you even like read these old theory people anymore, but even like these old like political theory authors who talk about political capital, who invented the concept of it, who like wrote the formulas and plugged them into the computer that demonstrated the existence of political capital, they all say that it's like a relatively small factor on the political process. They say it's like one factor among many that affects it. And yet it's the only thing that's talked about in debate grounds as like the sole determining factor of like what happens to any bill. So again, that's both a reasons why this doesn't help us understand politics at all argument, as well as just your internal link makes no sense at all. Like even if you win that like we impact political capital in some way, why does political capital matter on an issue like Iran, where everyone pretty clearly like views this as like a litmus test on your support for Israel, and like what Obama calls up and tells you, quite frankly, isn't going to adjust your calculus all that much of like how much you rely on AIPAC funding. You know what I mean? If you're a person who takes significant money from the Israel lobby, Obama could be on the phone with you for 3 hours and promise you all kinds of stuff, and you're not going to vote for the plan. In the same way that if you have a big Muslim, constituency and you don't take any money from AIPAC, then no amount of lobbying the other way is probably going to affect you. And so sure, political capital does matter on the margins of this type of stuff. But to represent it as like the only thing going on in these bills, and then to further represent that like the plan's effect on political capital is like the sole determining factor on it, is again, you just have to step back for a second and just think in the real world. Like what if the plan happened? Like think about that for a second. And then think, would it really make any sense for like all these people in Congress to start like jumping ship, even if they were pissed off? Right? And that's the thing, is that the link has been reduced to this pisses people off, and then political capital theory is just assumed, and so anything that pisses somebody off like trades off political capital, and then all of a sudden we're like at the bill not passing. But people, more than anything, don't vote against their interests. And if the plan does not alter anyone's interests on the thinking of the individual bill, then it is really kind of ridiculous to assert that there is a real link between the two, which is what debate is about. Now, this kind of leads us down the path to where there could be some really good politics scenarios. You know what I'm saying? Like, for instance, if someone did read a plan that to ban the deployment of drones to the Middle East, now, like, can you guys think of a couple of good link arguments to that plan about why that might affect the Iran deal? Like, a huge amount of the Iran deal is preferenced on the verification and inspections regime. And if we were to ban drones, that would change the world of verification and inspection that was previously negotiated under the plan. That's the type of plan where there's a real link, where you could argue that people are going to change their minds because a certain verification technique that was assumed under the world of the Iran deal, you just took out as a result of the plan. That's a real politics thing. That's a good dissad. That's not a dissad where you're just like, Obama did something, now he can't do something else, and now we're all screwed. You know, that's a discussion about the issues. That's political discussion. That's a discussion about, hey, if you do something, you better be aware that if you have an effect on any other bill that is currently in process, then you need to consider that implication. And that's good education. But political capital is not that. It's far from. It's just, like I said, most political capital debates, it does not get, the link discussion does not get further than one side reading a card that says like the plan is popular, one side reading a card that says the plan is not popular, and then reading a political capital card, and then it kind of gets left there, without even discussing whether or not the popularity of the policy has anything to do with political capital, which it probably doesn't. Certainly not in the Iran case. In this case, the public's opinion really doesn't matter. The international forces and the international lobbies at play are so big, specifically the Israel and the Saudi Arabians and all of those big lobbies, that the policy in Iran is 100% about balancing our relationship with Israel versus our oil interests with Saudi Arabia. And it's about balancing that out and making sure that with all the business we funnel Saudi Arabia's way, we don't piss off Israel enough, and vice versa. With the support that we send Israel, we don't piss off Saudi Arabia enough to hike the price on us. And that's what it's basically about. And the fact that, like, you know, the public gets upset one way or another, it doesn't really concern most of these politicians all that much. And if it does, then you really need to produce evidence, I think, to say that, and the AF should be challenging that. And so, I honestly think that the biggest thing I can tell you is that you gotta read the news every day. And debaters, I think, can get away with this. When I was in college, we had politics people, like, on the team, because that was just like the way we organized it. And so, like, 2 people were responsible for, like, producing all of our politics work for every tournament. And so I thought that basically meant that I didn't have to, like, worry about politics. Like, I just had a file, I trusted them, like, I had my blocks, like, I didn't really need to know what was going on, right? So I, like, didn't read, like, long-form news, and I figured, like, all the information I needed I could get from the cards. The problem is that now all of a sudden your actual, like, real political reality of the real world is being filtered through a couple of different mechanisms. One is a short form mechanism, because you're not actually reading full articles, you're just reading, like, the selective, like, 2 paragraphs of whatever someone has picked out to support the argument. And 2, it's completely mediated by some ridiculous debate interpretation of how politics theory works, which is political capital, and you start to actually view all of these issues in the lens of political capital. Whereas once you get out of debate, this becomes so obvious so quickly, because if you just follow the Iran deal by only reading the news every day and never, like, reading cards that debaters have cut, anybody that would argue that political capital was a factor in this decision, like, they would just laugh at you. They wouldn't understand what you were talking about, because it's not been in any of, like, the real reports and in any of the real analysis of what's going on. It's the farthest thing from anyone's minds. But all of a sudden, if, like, the only media you're consuming on the Iran DA is, like, cards cut in preparation for a political capital DA, your thinking can get warped so fast. And it's not that you don't get it. It's not that you don't understand what's really going on. It's just that your ability to react instantly to some of the logical absurdities is reduced because you're so used to just hearing the systemic arguments, and it doesn't cross your mind. But for me, like, being out of debate is the exact opposite. And, like, every time I hear something like, you know, political capital is going to derail the Iran thing, it's like a guttural thing. It just instantly seems absurd, because I've been reading the real Iran news and no one has ever talked about seen political capital in any article ever. Like, any card that has those 2 things in the same paragraph is clearly the result of a debater search and probably, like, planted by Phil Kirkland or something. I mean, like, it's just not a real thing. And so I tell you what. And this applies just about everything. It's not just politics. Reading the news is good for everything. Just, like, having a really, really basic understanding of what is happening in the world. Just really basic, really basic. Like, there was a corruption investigation in Guatemala today. There was they're focusing on what is the major fluctuations in the market. And most of the time, this does not require more than reading the headlines and maybe the little blurb under the bottom of it on the front of the news page, and maybe reading, like, 2 or 3 articles that you're interested in. This does not take a lot of time, but I promise you that if you spend 15 minutes a morning going through an actual edited page, whether it be the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Tennessean even, USA Today, some kind of hopefully global-minded paper. I would recommend hopefully New York Times or Wall Street Journal, something like that. Just read the basic content and just see what happens after a couple of weeks of that at a debate tournament. You will be absolutely shocked just understanding a little bit of global context at the number of times people will say just, like, ridiculous things that you will be able to say, I just know that that's not true. Like, and I'll tell you why. And I don't have a card on it, but I'm going to be able to explain just in a couple of quick sentences here what you just said is totally ludicrous. And there's no reason why you'd be able to do that unless, and like I said, it does not require a ton of time. Try it for 15 minutes a morning. and see what happens at your next tournament. And I promise you, it's gonna like make you see certain arguments totally differently, and it's gonna help you answer them so much better. Because it's so important, I think that's the most important thing I can tell you about answering arguments without evidence, is that it's all about divorcing yourself from the debate bubble. Quite frankly, the only reason why the premium on evidence is the way it is because like we've been conditioned in debate to think that like, oh well, if a card is there, then it's, and we don't have a counter card, then it's obviously true. But that, if anyone tries to like actually say that and like make that appeal to the judge, and like, it's intimidating. I know it's intimidating to hear this said, you've never heard before, and have to sit there and go through and basically just like read a couple of impact takeouts and like make some arguments, right? But if anyone challenges you and says, a card should trump any analytical argument, you should go back to this logical policymaking thing and say that is like completely ridiculous. Like in any discussion in the world, just because one side is prepared on a certain issue and the other side isn't, to deny the counter logic. We're not saying like you shouldn't be allowed to run the argument, but we are saying that you should take any logic that we offer against that argument and weigh it up against their explanation of the warrants and the cards. And only then, when there's like a tie between those things, should a card be preferenced. But if you're out debating whatever the warrants or lack of warrants are in some stupid piece of evidence, then it defies logic to say that, well, they were just better prepared for this debate, so I think that they should win. Like, that's ridiculous. That's what we're trying to overcome, is promoting free thinking like that. And so here are a couple other suggestions you can do when you hear like an argument you've never heard before. Is read their evidence, all of it, especially the ununderlined parts, because that gives you context on it. And quite frankly, it usually will point out a lot of the logical links that you need against it. For instance, there was a big debate I was in my senior year where these guys read a free trade dissent that we would call some free trade thing that we had no evidence on. We never even heard of it. It had just been like figured out like a couple days before. And we beat them on no link analytically, although I did have 11 cards that I was referencing in the 2AR, which was all their link cards. And it turned out that every single link card that I picked up that they read did in fact link our plan, said that this was a necessary condition to get this deal through, but also listed like 7 other conditions that were all necessary to the passage of this plan, that all of which the plan didn't affect and took out the link. Right? And so it's like their own evidence, just by like reading, and of course they had just highlighted our plan in this list of things that needed to get done in order for this deal to get done. And I was just like, look, this isn't link evidence. This is evidence that this is one issue among 10 that is affecting the plan. And that was a pretty quick, find. But there's almost always, if you've never heard of it, think of it like this. If you've never heard of the argument before, you truly are taken totally by surprise and you don't have any strategy against it, it's very unlikely that this is like anything other than a super constructive argument, right? If you're like doing serious research into your app, somewhere along the line you're going to come across like the real arguments against this stuff. It's very unlikely that like you're going to be totally shocked by something new. And so almost always when it is something completely new and you have no idea what's going on, it's something that's basically been constructed in some debate coach's mind, and then like they find evidence and piece it together. And so that's the point where reading their cards is super damning, because most of the time the sort of like articles that their cards are coming from like completely conflicting sources and stuff, and that's why they're able to like concoct it. They're reading like internal link cards from like the right wing and then like link cards from the left wing and then putting them together to create some scenario which doesn't reflect anything real, or maybe points out like the flaws in the logic. So these days, I never debated when people were connected to the internet. What is your guys' procedure when you hear a new argument? Do you guys do you try to cut cards during the round, or?
Yeah, I've done it like a couple times.
But you don't normally spend a lot of time?
No, it's usually like during like either 2A seed prep, since I'm like a 1A, or during like seed prep.
But I guess what I'm saying is though, if it's truly an argument you've never heard of, it shouldn't take too much of a quick search to kind of like figure out where the major flaw in this is. You know, to kind of figure out where they're pulling this from, and like, at the very least, what your line of attack is at that point should be. Like, if you find immediately that their source is from like some kind of, you know, total right-wing conspiracy website or whatever, then you know to attack it, you know, as such. And if you realize that it comes from like a law review and that some, you know, law student, you know, bashing out a theory late at night, then you know how to attack it from that angle. But it's so important, I think these days, having in the old days, the old days when I debated, the debaters could hide the context for you because you didn't have computers, there wasn't internet, and so if they cut the card strategically enough and formatted it on their computers enough, there really wouldn't be any way, if they did it good enough, for you to be able to like figure out what was going on. These days, I would just go straight to their source, and quite frankly, and then read the summary and conclusion paragraphs. And almost certainly, you're going to find a viewpoint that, like, if it doesn't like conflict with what they've said, is going to help you put it in context in some way. You know, it's almost not as catastrophic as they've portrayed it. So I would advocate using the resource a little bit more, and I know that the hesitancy is probably like, well, I don't want to waste a minute of my prep time on Google if I don't have a card to show for it at the end. And I guess I would just say that if you do spend a minute, like I said, reading the summary, either the abstract or the conclusion to like whatever article they're deriving their counterclaim solvency or their dissent from, I really believe that you're going to like have the ability to make arguments that are going to be more useful than pulling impact takeouts or something super generic that doesn't, you know, I think that's what drives me crazier more than anything, is that when people are confronted by something new, a lot of time their reaction is simply to like read impact takeouts or try to impact term. And you've already kind of lost the moral battle at that point, because the whole point of the negative reading some construed scenario like that is so you don't challenge it, and so they get to just have some impact debate. If they're reading something to get away from like anything you've ever heard from before, they don't want to be debating the intricacies of the link. Like, that's why they do that, as opposed to reading a good link that you were prepared for, but being confident in their ability to outdebate you on it. They don't want to do that. And so it plays right into their hands when you impact turn that stuff, because you just give them, you just concede all the weak part of their argument and get straight to like hedge or something. And it's just like, well, now you're just in a hedge debate, and now we've learned nothing, you know? I would make it a goal to have one solid analytical argument in the 2AC against every off-case position. I think that's like a reasonable exercise to try. And my definition of good analytical is one that you are intending to extend and like think could be a good objection in the 2AR. You know what I mean? Like, think not just one that's just like, oh, they don't have a card that says this, or, you know, their link card isn't as strong as they said it was, you know, look at cross-ex. No, I'm talking about an argument that says this is a fundamental flaw in this dissent, that there's no amount of evidence that they can read that's going to correct. And we think that, you know, in the 2AR, we're pretty sure that even if they throw 50 cards at this problem, you're going to look at it and say you can't add it up. If you have one of those arguments on every flow at the beginning of each debate and seriously consider extending them, I'll be really interested to see how many more debates you start having these types of analytical arguments in the 2AR on. And I think like the success will build on itself, because like once you realize that like it is far easier to just point out a logical inconsistency with the argument and exploit that and explain why that's important better than the other team than it is to attempt to read one more link card or one more uniqueness card and then just pray that the judge's reading of the evidence after the round somehow matches up to whatever you've said, right? Isn't it so much safer to rely on the fact that you can look the judge in the eye at the end of the round and say, you know what, no matter what you read in all this evidence, like, it's gonna just create a headache. Just think about this logically for a second. Take a step back and say, none of their evidence addresses this crucial question. And I'll tell you what, judges are gonna take that out a ridiculous amount of the time. I really think so. And you know, and I don't wanna like, you know, I don't want to, like, you know, give you a false sense of confidence. I know that there are judges out there who, you know, take, and this is definitely a judge adaptation thing. I mean, and this absolutely goes for the politics theory too. there are going to be judges out there, and the people that you want to identify are kind of old school minded people. They don't have to be old, but they have to be able, they have to have an understanding of like old school debate theory, you know? And all that resolution and plan focus stuff that I'm talking about, if you don't understand that stuff, like no one has ever explained the history of it to you before, and your whole understanding of like politics theory, conditionality theory, aging counterclaim theory and stuff, have all come from reading theory blocks. You're going to be less inclined to vote for these arguments than if you have an understanding of where these arguments came from, what debate looked like before these arguments, and understand that evolution. Because and this goes back to what I was saying earlier about the people who are going to be like, oh my God, you know, how could you take the politics piece out away from us? Everybody who has that visceral reaction of just like, oh, we couldn't possibly debate out of politics to set. All of them, that is evidence that they either do not know of or do not like take the sort of history of debate into active account in their theoretical discussions. In their mind, debate theory starts and ends with plan-focused debate, and the politics dissent is obviously a part of that, and it shouldn't, you know. But anyone who like understands the theory of it, and so, you know, I would say that the people you're looking for are older judges, experienced judges, and judges who are theoretically minded. If someone has a reputation as a theory hack, this isn't always true, but it's pretty rare that, like, certainly in college, that debaters are winning theory debates at high levels without having a really good understanding of, like, these issues and having gone back and read the Solt articles and the Dirge and all that kind of stuff. You know, it's you know, as much as people like to complain about, like, well, you're not even going to understand this reference, but people like Brett Wallace and people like that, you know, like, those guys got into the theory and they wrote their own blocks and they read the old stuff and then they understood the history of it. And anyone who understands like that stuff is not going to think this is crazy. I promise you. They may not. I'm not saying that they're going to think that this is like an automatic win or anything, but you should not be intimidated about making these assertions in front of judges who have a good theoretical understanding. Yeah.
For judges who aren't so like inclined to vote for this, is there a better way to package it other than just like
no
TA intrinsic?
Absolutely no, and that's a really great question. I'm not dismissing you at all. That is a great question, and I'm going to say it like this. I mean, this is like politics in the real world. I really think that in this case we are not going to like change a lot of people's minds, and I don't know. There are people who come from a certain sect of debate where politics is just so crucial to their understanding of debate that I just don't think that arguing politics illegitimate in front of an MSU judge is worth your time, no matter what form it takes. And then the converse of that is, if it is worth your time and you are making these arguments, this I think is the best form of the argument by far. And I'm aware of all the other arguments. I did a lot of thinking about this in college, and I have not done a significant amount of new thinking since, but I really came to the conclusion that like all of the sort of fiat solves, fiat takes out, what's the vote neg, all the other theory gimmicks, vote no, sorry, yeah. All those other ones, they're all interesting, they're all fun to goof around with and throw out there. I would not want to rest my 2AR on any of those against like a serious discussion. Like I thought, like, man, if I throw one out there and someone drops it and then they still continue to mishandle it, like maybe I'd go for it. But like if someone like knew what was going on and was seriously like arguing the theory, I don't think any of those like truly hold up. But I just firmly believe in this like logical policy making objection. And I think that if you just want to like break it down really easily to decide the benchmark for like where you want to run this. Like if you are convinced that it does in fact like deviate from the logical policymaking paradigm, and if you feel like the judge is receptive to the to that interpretation of debate, then there's not that much you have to win, quite frankly. Everything else is basically being able to explain why the politics dissent doesn't help education. I think that's the biggest argument that you have to overcome, is the idea that like this is like something useful to be debating. And then questions about like fairness and stuff. I mean, those are the and I'm not saying that these aren't like valid objections, but I'm just saying that the debate is actually relatively small. And the thing I liked about this debate was that this isn't one of those things where the 2NC can just come up like they came on like conditionality sometimes and just read like 12 arguments and bury you in it. They might say 12 things, they might label 12 arguments, but they're all going to fall into those basic groups. And most of the time, people were undercovering it, not overcovering it. Even when I was going for this stuff, like people would say like two things. I mean, that's where I think like you can pop people, because the ideology is so politics oriented today that people will go to this stuff and just be like, that would totally crush our ground and we would get no political education, and then they move on. And I'll tell you what, my lips were salivating when I heard 2NC like that. I mean, like, even if you don't want to go for it, just a 45-second investment in the 1AR now like has the 2N like seriously considering kicking politics, like, and is going to draw probably a 2-minute investment from the 2NR. And when the 2NR has to spend 2 minutes on a theory thing before even getting to the policy part of their argument, the app is in a great spot. You know, if they spend less than 2 minutes on it, it's a legitimate option for you to go for. And if they overcover it when they get scared of you on it, then all of a sudden, all of those internal inconsistencies that you've been analytically pointing out at the top of the debate, they don't get any time to explain why all their stupid uniqueness cards answer any of those arguments. And they can't possibly explain a coherent strategy in 3 minutes that involves either a politics dissat and a counterplan or a politics dissat and case debate. You can't possibly do that in 3 minutes against a good 2A, right? 2A is going to take that 5-minute to 3-minute trade-off every time and be like, I don't even need a card to prove why your politics dissat's stupid. And I just got 2 minutes off your theory. So I think it could just be a super valuable tool. And I think the way, and like I said, from a purely strategic point of view, I think the time trade-off you're going to get from being able to viably extend this argument is going to always be in your favor at the very beginning. The way this is going to play out is you make a 2-sentence argument in the 2AC that a logical policymaker could definitely do the plan and pass whatever stupid bill politics dissat is, and that logical policymaker should be viewed above all education because it's timeless and applicable to all situations. You know, a really quick argument like that draws a lame response from the 2NC, a 45-second extension in the 1AR creates a serious jam for the 2NR, if done well. It really does. I mean, like, at that point, if they don't spend a significant amount of time basically establishing their warrants for the very first time, because they just wasted the entire block not articulating warrants for why this was good, right? They just wasted it. They just said, it's good for education, it's good for fairness. That's what the judge has flowed. And then you spend 45 seconds re-explaining this paradigm that they clearly missed, right? They've got to spend at least 2 minutes in the 2NR re-establishing the theoretical credibility of the dissat to begin with. And if they spend less than that, then go for it. And if they spend more than that, then be willing to chuck it and go for the policy stuff that's been undercovered. But either way, it's just such a strategic bind to put negatives in. And until they start, and the worst that happens is the negative takes it seriously and spends a minute on it in the 2NC, and then you got a slightly less valuable, but still somewhat valuable time trade-off with the 1AR. Then you can kick it then. It's always such a great tool. It's just such a great tool to have in your toolbox. It applies to every politics dissat, elections, DA, and it's something like if you just get burned on a dissat, it's always in your back pocket. Like I was never, ever, ever worried about someone breaking a new politics dissat against me because I knew at the very worst, I'd be able to at least like make a couple of internal link arguments, and if the worst came to worst, like go for theory, you know? And that's an amazingly liberating. Now you can spend all your time researching case, you know? You don't have to think about this stuff anymore. So it's, yeah, I just think it's a great tool to have in your toolbox. And not always one, like I said, necessarily go for. You got to pick your judges, and you got to get to know your judges. But you know, another thing you can do is talk to people like this. I don't think anyone benefits from having this be a secret. Go up to judges and talk to them in the hallways about it. What do you think about this? What do you think about politics theory? What do you think about what politics is doing to debate? Do you think it's good or not? You know. You're going to get some surprising answers. You're going to get people out there who feel like, well, I'm just so sick of hearing politics. And those are the people you want to target immediately. Because these arguments are going to start resonating big time. You give someone like that who's just sick of hearing politics debates a theoretical justification, you can kick them out of the debate, they're going to jump on that so fast. Those are sometimes even better than the theoretically minded judges. Or the people who are like fed up with politics but have never thought about this stuff before. Man, they're right. But yeah, any questions about any of that?
All right, well, let's say thank you to Mr. Lamballe.